adapted from 1001 Nights. Sindbad's fifth voyage. The giant birds and serpents. After his previous perilous voyages, Sindbad returned to Baghdad, laden with wealth. His home was adorned with treasures from across the seas, and the people of Baghdad revered him for his daring adventures. Yet, despite the wealth, the admiration, and the comfort of his life in the bustling city, Sindbad found himself feeling restless once again. The quiet routines of his life no longer excited him, and the luxuries that surrounded him brought little satisfaction. His thoughts began to drift back to the sea, the thrill of exploration, and the countless mysteries still waiting to be uncovered in distant lands. Sitting by a window in his grand house, Sindbad pondered his life and the risks he had taken. What had all his adventures brought him beyond material wealth? Though he had survived dangers that would have overwhelmed most men, he now wondered what drove him to seek out those risks in the first place. Was it simply the lure of riches? Or was there something deeper, some unknown force pulling him toward the sea and the unknown? As much as he had gained, Sindbad realized that the wealth he accumulated felt incomplete, almost hollow, compared to the sense of fulfillment he had hoped to achieve. The call of adventure whispered to him, louder each day, until Sindbad could no longer resist. He was drawn once more to the sea, not only by the promise of fortune, but by an unshakable feeling that there was something more he needed to find, something beyond gold or jewels, something that might answer the questions lingering in his heart about life, fate, and fortune. One evening, Sindbad made his decision. He would set sail again, embarking on what he vowed would be his final voyage. He hoped that this adventure would bring the answers he sought. Walking down to the docks, the familiar scent of salt in the air filled him with anticipation. The waves lapped gently against the ships, and the sky was painted with the soft hues of sunset. Sindbad stood for a moment, gazing out at the horizon, feeling both excitement and a twinge of uncertainty. The sea promised untold treasures, but it also held dangers beyond imagination. With his crew gathered, Sindbad boarded the ship that would carry him toward his next, and perhaps greatest, adventure. As the ship pulled away from the harbor, he could not help but feel a sense of unease. He had faced greed, treachery, and death on his previous journeys, and he knew that every adventure carried its risks. Still, the allure of rare and exotic treasures stirred his heart, even as a quiet voice in the back of his mind questioned the price of such riches. The ship sailed into the open waters, the wind filling the sails, and the endless expanse of the ocean stretching out before them. Sindbad stood at the bow, staring out at the waves, his mind full of both hope and doubt. He knew this journey would be different. As Sindbad's ship sailed through calm, sparkling seas, the crew basked in the tranquility, enjoying the ease of their journey. The horizon stretched endlessly, the waves lapping gently against the ship's hull, and the clear sky promised smooth sailing ahead. Sindbad stood at the helm, taking in the beauty of the vast ocean, feeling a temporary sense of peace. Yet, as always with the sea, calmness can be deceptive. Suddenly, without warning, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a storm broke loose with a fury they had not anticipated. The ship was tossed by enormous waves, its sails torn asunder by the relentless winds. The crew scrambled to save the vessel, but the storm was too powerful. Lightning cracked through the sky, and before long, the ship was torn apart by the raging sea, scattering Sindbad and his men into the water. After what felt like an eternity of battling the storm, Sindbad awoke on the shores of a mysterious island. The sky was clear again, and the island before him was a paradise, a stark contrast to the storm's wrath. Tall trees swayed gently in the breeze, birds sang overhead, and lush greenery surrounded them. Sindbad's heart, though still heavy from the disaster, was soothed by the island's serene beauty. His men, who had also survived the shipwreck, gathered around him, their relief palpable as they took in the peaceful surroundings. For a time, the island seemed to offer only solace. As they explored the island's forests and rivers, they marveled at the untouched beauty of the landscape. Sindbad found himself momentarily forgetting the dangers that always seemed to accompany his adventures. The scent of blooming flowers, the sound of a distant waterfall, and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze gave the island a sense of quiet magic. He felt as though they had stumbled upon a haven, a place untouched by the troubles of the outside world. But their peaceful exploration was soon interrupted by a discovery that would change the course of their stay. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the island, Sindbad and his crew stumbled upon an astonishing sight. An enormous egg, larger than any they had ever seen. It gleamed in the sunlight, its shell almost as smooth as marble. They stood in awe, their breath catching as they realized what they had found. It was the egg of a roc, a legendary bird of mythical size and power. Inside, they could hear faint movements, suggesting that a baby roc lay within. At first, they were filled with wonder, captivated by the sheer size and mystery of the egg. But as the realization of its potential value sank in, awe quickly turned to greed. The crew, their eyes widening with desire, began to whisper among themselves. The roc's egg was worth a fortune. If they could sell it, or even better, steal the baby roc, they would be wealthier than they had ever imagined. The temptation of such immense wealth was overwhelming. Sindbad, however, hesitated. He stood apart from his men, his heart conflicted. While the sight of the egg stirred a desire for treasure within him, something else tugged at his conscience. He had faced greed before, and he knew how easily it could blind a man. The thought of killing the baby bird for profit filled him with unease. The roc, after all, was a creature of immense power. It was not just any bird. It was a force of nature, and tampering with such a creature could bring disaster. As his crew pressed to break the egg and take the riches within, Sindbad felt the weight of his decision pressing on him. His thoughts turned inward. He questioned himself. Was his desire for wealth clouding his judgment? Had he not learned from past voyages that fortune often came at a price? He wondered if his crew's greed would lead them into danger, and whether it was worth risking their lives for treasure that, in the end, might bring nothing but ruin. The pull of greed was strong, but Sindbad, deep in thought, realized that sometimes the cost of temptation far outweighed the rewards. Still, his men were growing impatient, their hunger for riches overtaking any caution. Sindbad stood in silence for a moment longer, staring at the massive egg. The decision weighed heavily on him. Despite Sindbad's repeated warnings, the crew, intoxicated by the potential riches hidden within the rock's egg, pressed forward. Driven by greed and disregard for the consequences, they smashed the giant egg open, breaking its fragile shell to reveal a nest of treasures nestled alongside the baby rock. Gems, rare stones, and glittering treasures lay scattered around the delicate, helpless creature. The crew eagerly scooped up handfuls of jewels, their laughter and exclamations echoing through the quiet island. But as Sindbad looked upon the scene, a heavy feeling settled over him. There was something unsettling, a sense that by tampering with the egg, they had disrupted a natural balance, crossing a line that should have remained unbroken. He looked at the helpless baby bird they had slain and felt a deep unease. The rock was not just a bird, it was a force of nature, a creature beyond human understanding, and his companions had treated it as nothing more than a treasure chest. Before long, a shadow loomed overhead, casting darkness across the island. Sindbad looked up, his heart sinking as he saw the rock, its parent, soaring above them. The bird's massive wings stretched out, their span darkening the sky. The rock circled slowly, silently at first, taking in the devastation on the ground below. Its powerful gaze locked onto the broken egg and the scattered remains of its child. A deafening cry soon filled the air, a sound that reverberated across the island, carrying with it a fury that seemed to shake the very earth. The bird swooped low, circling once more, and Sindbad realized that escape was impossible. The rock's majesty was undeniable, its enormous form both beautiful and terrifying as it blotted out the sun. Its cries echoed like thunder, each one a promise of vengeance for the destruction its young had suffered. Sindbad could see that nature had answered the greed of his companions with a force far greater than any human power. The island, which had seemed so serene and safe, was now under siege from an indignant guardian defending its own. As the rock circled, it began to drop massive boulders, uprooted trees, and stones upon the crew and their makeshift camp. One by one, Sindbad's companions were struck down, crushed beneath the unforgiving weight of the rocks. Their cries of pain and desperation mingled with the rock's thunderous calls, each stone falling with merciless precision. Sindbad watched helplessly as his comrades, once so confident in their pursuit of treasure, met their end under the unstoppable force of nature. The scene was swift, brutal, and final. The ship that had brought them to the island lay nearby, and as the rock continued its relentless assault, it aimed its fury at the vessel. Stones smashed into the ship's wooden frame, splintering it to pieces and rendering it useless. The ship crumbled under the rock's wrath, each boulder tearing through the wood with terrifying force. The crew's hopes of escape were destroyed alongside the vessel, and Sindbad was left alone amidst the ruins, the lone survivor amidst the wreckage. The silence that followed was haunting. Sindbad stood among the ruins, surrounded by the remains of his companions and the shattered pieces of the ship. The rock, its vengeance complete, soared away, leaving the island as quiet as it had been before their arrival. Sindbad felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, helplessness, and sorrow. He wondered if his own unspoken greed, his decision to come on yet another voyage in pursuit of treasure, had led to this calamity. In that moment, he was forced to confront the fragility of life. realizing that human ambition and desire were insignificant in the face of forces far beyond his control. Alone on the island, Sindbad sat quietly, reflecting on the disaster that had befallen him and his companions. He understood now the cost of greed, the price of disrupting the natural order, and the consequences of ignoring the wisdom that cautions restraint. The beauty of nature, he realized, was accompanied by a power that demanded respect and humility, qualities his companions had lacked, and for which they had paid the ultimate price. After the rock's devastating attack, Sindbad found himself stranded in a remote valley, its towering cliffs looming overhead like silent sentinels. As he explored this new land, it became clear that this valley was both a place of unimaginable beauty and peril. The cliffs sparkled with embedded jewels, and the ground was littered with scattered treasures, but the treasures were not freely offered. The valley was also home to giant serpents, creatures whose sinuous bodies glistened under the sunlight, their scales reflecting a shimmering, almost mesmerizing beauty. Yet, their lethality was undeniable. Sindbad marveled at the juxtaposition of beauty and danger that surrounded him. The serpents moved with an eerie grace, their silent, watchful eyes ever alert, making him aware of how precarious his situation truly was. He was caught between the temptation of the valley's hidden treasures and the ever-present threat of these deadly creatures. The very sight of them filled him with awe and fear, a reminder of nature's ability to be both enchanting and deadly. Sindbad began to reflect on how easily human desires, particularly greed, could lead to ruin in such a setting. He thought back to his ill-fated companions, who had ignored his warnings and had fallen prey to their own greed. The valley, he realized, was no different, offering riches beyond imagination, but only at great personal risk. The serpents, with their slow, deliberate movements, were a constant reminder that treasure was never freely given. It always came at a cost. As day turned into night, Sindbad's heart quickened, for it was at night that the serpents grew most active, hunting under the cover of darkness. He knew he had to find shelter if he was to survive the night. Using his wits, Sindbad located a small cave in which he could take refuge, its narrow entrance offering some protection from the serpent's reach. He huddled inside, listening to the sounds of the valley, the rustling of the serpents as they moved stealthily through the underbrush, their presence a constant threat in the darkened landscape. In the quiet solitude of the cave, Sindbad's thoughts returned to survival. His strength alone would not be enough to see him through this perilous journey. He needed to rely on his cleverness and adaptability. He remembered stories he had heard from traveling merchants who had survived similar valleys by observing the ways of nature. These merchants, seeking diamonds from the valley, would throw large pieces of meat into the open, allowing the jewels to stick to the flesh. Eagles and other birds would then swoop down to snatch the meat, carrying it and the attached diamonds up to safer ground where the merchants could retrieve their bounty. This method, simple but ingenious, gave Sindbad an idea. He knew he needed to escape the valley and avoid the serpents that prowled the floor. Using the knowledge he had gathered from previous adventures and his keen understanding of the natural world, he decided to use the same technique. Early the next morning, as the sun rose and the serpents retreated into their hiding places, Sindbad ventured out from the cave, scanning the valley for a solution. He spotted a large slab of meat lying nearby, left behind by some previous merchant's failed expedition. Working quickly, he tied himself to the slab, knowing that this was his best chance of escape. His plan was simple. Just as the eagles would carry the meat away, they would also lift him with it, transporting him out of the valley and away from the serpents. As he waited, Sindbad's mind filled with uncertainty, but he knew he had to trust his instincts. Before long, a great eagle descended, its powerful talons gripping the slab of meat. With a sudden jolt, Sindbad was lifted off the ground, the valley of serpents shrinking beneath him as the eagle carried him higher into the sky. For a brief moment, Sindbad was overwhelmed by a sense of freedom as he soared above the valley, the air rushing past him, the serpents and their deadly gaze left far below. His survival, he realized, had not been achieved through brute strength, but through careful observation and clever strategy. The same nature that had presented such danger had also provided the means for his escape. As the eagle flew higher, Sindbad felt a deep sense of humility and respect for the forces of the natural world. The serpents had been a reminder of life's ever-present dangers, and the eagle had shown him that survival often depended on working with, rather than against, those forces. It was a lesson he had learned throughout his voyages, that the greatest challenges could be overcome not by sheer force, but by wisdom, resilience, and the ability to adapt. After his daring escape from the Valley of Serpents, Sindbad was discovered by a group of merchants who had come to the island in search of its treasures. Astonished by his survival and the jewels he carried with him, they welcomed him aboard their ship. As the vessel sailed through calm waters, Sindbad remained quiet, contemplating the journey he had just endured. He looked at the gleaming jewels he had collected, treasures that would once have filled him with excitement. But this time, they felt different. No longer symbols of triumph, but reminders of the dangerous path he had walked to obtain them. His wealth had cost him more than effort. It had nearly cost him his life. The jewels glistened in the sunlight, yet Sindbad's thoughts were elsewhere, on the fragility of life and the thin line between fortune and disaster. As the ship gently rocked in the tranquil sea, Sindbad found himself captivated by the serene beauty of the world around him. The waters were clear and endless, the horizon stretching out in a calm, peaceful embrace. The sky above was vast and open, with soft clouds drifting lazily. The journey back to Baghdad was marked not by the anticipation of wealth or the rush of adventure, but by a deep, quiet reflection. The ocean that had once been a place of peril now seemed a cradle of calm, a reminder of nature's duality, its power to both give life and take it away. For the first time in many years, Sindbad felt no hunger for more riches. The sea and sky, the simple act of survival, and the beauty of the moment were riches enough. The world had shown him its grandeur in both treasure and danger, and he now understood that wealth, while alluring, was a fleeting illusion compared to the true riches found in wisdom and the appreciation of life itself. Upon his return to Baghdad, Sindbad was greeted with the same admiration and awe he had always received. His companions marveled at the wealth he brought back, But Sindbad's heart was no longer consumed by the pursuit of gold and jewels. He had seen the price that greed could exact and had nearly paid it himself. The rock, the serpents, and the treacherous sea were all reminders that wealth could never be taken for granted, nor could it protect against the forces of nature or fate. Now, back in his familiar city, Sindbad found comfort not in his wealth, but in the simple pleasures of life. He walked through the bustling streets of Baghdad, greeted by friends and family, but his mind was on the quiet moments of peace he had found on the open sea. In his heart, he had changed. Wealth was no longer his driving force. Instead, he cherished the stillness of the sunset, the laughter of children playing, and the gentle breeze that whispered through the trees. Sitting by a river one evening, watching the golden sun sink into the horizon, Sindbad reflected on his 5th voyage. He thought of the rock and its majestic, fearsome power. He remembered the serpents that slithered silently through the valley, embodying both beauty and danger. He saw them not merely as obstacles to overcome, but as symbols of life's greater forces. Forces beyond human control. Forces that demanded respect and humility. These creatures had shown him that nature was a powerful and untamable force, indifferent to human desire or greed. As he sat quietly, feeling the soft breeze on his face, Sindbad let go of the obsession that had driven him for so long. The pursuit of wealth had led him into danger, time and time again, but it had also taught him the value of survival, resilience, and humility. The treasures he had brought back were less important than the lessons he had learned. In the quiet of the evening, with the river flowing gently by and the sky painted with the colors of dusk, Sindbad found peace. His adventures had shaped him, but they no longer defined him. His wealth was no longer measured in gold, but in the wisdom he had gained and the contentment he now felt in the simple, beautiful moments of life. And as the sun disappeared below the horizon, Sindbad smiled to himself, feeling truly rich for the first time. As you close your eyes, let the echoes of this story guide you to peace. Drift gently into sleep, knowing you are part of a world where love and wisdom shine bright. May your dreams be calm, comforting, and filled with wonder.